Hi YouTube! This week I'm going to be talking about what it's like to work in freelance or being self-employed. Alright, so as hopefully most of my regular viewers know, I am self-employed. I have been running my own web analytics consulting business for 4 years. I've been a sole proprietor, so I'm the only one in the company right now, although I am just right now hiring a couple of subcontractors to help me out with work because things have actually gotten busy enough that I could actually use the help. And I thought this week might be a good week for me to talk a little bit about the experience of being self-employed. Especially in an internet-related industry, because that's what I'm familiar with. I know there's lots of ways of being self-employed. You could own your own little corner flower shop, and technically you're self-employed as well. You don't have a boss, you are the boss. You run a restaurant. If you own a restaurant, you're self-employed as well, although you tend to have employees and things, so you're not in the same situation I am, where you're a sole proprietor. But for many of us who work on internet-related things, for me it's web analytics. There's people out there doing business intelligence, graphic design, tech writing, programming and development, etc. A lot of those jobs can be done as a self-employed person, and you can freelance doing those things, especially developers, programmers, graphic designers. They tend to use the word freelance. For those of us in the analytics and business intelligence side of things, we tend to refer to ourselves as consultants because companies hire us to consult them on how to best go about using their web analytics tools or their business intelligence tools and that kind of thing. So basically, at the end of the day, same difference. Freelance, consultant, contractor, etc. We're all self-employed, and for the most part, we are sole proprietors. And one thing, the first thing I'm going to say is that I think it's very smart for anyone who is a freelance, sole proprietor, self-employed person to make sure that they have an LLC. I have my own LLC. LLC stands for Limited Liability Company or Corporation. The C can stand for either one. It all depends on how you structure the LLC, and there's all sorts of legal stuff behind all that. The most basic way of structuring an LLC is something called a pass-through, which basically means that any income my company earns passes through to me directly. I'm just going to say that having an LLC, I think, is a wise idea if you're self-employed, because that way your clients, if they are unhappy with you and decide to want to sue you for whatever reason, they can't come after your personal assets. They can only come after your business assets. So you're less likely to have a problem with them trying to sue you for a lot of money, because if your business doesn't have a lot of money, it's all passing through to you directly. They can't come after your personal assets, like your house and your car and etc. So it's very wise to have an LLC because it can give you a certain level of protection from that kind of thing, especially if you end up having a fraudulent client who wants to try and take you for all that you're worth and everything. So that's my first advice for anyone who out there is currently freelancing or doing any kind of online self-employment kind of work. One other thing, some other things to keep in mind if you are thinking about getting into being self-employed. One is that you are going to be paying more taxes if you're in the US. And I let me preface all this by saying that I'm only talking about people in the US because I don't know how self-employment works in other countries. So I apologize if you're not in the US, because this may or may not apply to you. And you're going to have to do some online research to find out whether or not it applies to you or not. At the end of the day, in the US, you have to pay more taxes being self-employed. The reason being, there's this one part of the tax code. It's called payroll tax, which is different from income tax. There's you have your federal income tax and your state income tax, but then the payroll tax, it's also often known as FICA, F-I-C-A, And bottom line is, it's the money that you pay towards Social Security and Medicare. And I think right now it's somewhere between 15 and 17% of your income goes to that. If you're an employee with a company, you only pay half of that. I'm going to say 15% just to make the math easier, but if you're an employee, and if it's 15%, then you pay 7.5% towards the FICA, and your employer pays 7.5%. When you're self-employed, you have to pay both of them. So you have to pay the full 15%, which may actually be 17% now. I forget. Anyway, so at the end of the day, there's going to be more taxes. And then another tax thing to keep in mind, if you're freelancing and you're earning, I think the threshold is about $25,000 a year. If you're earning more than that, you have to start paying quarterly estimated taxes. So every quarter, it's like January 15th, April 15th, etc., you have to pay an estimated estimated amount of tax. So since you're not having your taxes taken out of you don't have a paycheck, your clients just pay you, and you have to set aside some of that money to pay taxes. And instead of paying that tax once a year, the government wants you to pay it every quarter. So you have to figure out, okay, about how much am I going to make this year? Let's say $50,000. Then you've got to figure out, okay, so how much tax am I going to owe? And then divide that by 4, and that's how much you're estimating how much taxes you're going to have to pay each quarter. Now, you may estimate you're going to make $50,000, and let's say you make $60,000 instead, and so you didn't put in enough tax. Well, then you're going to have to owe tax the next April with the annual tax return. And if you estimated $50,000 and you only made $40,000, but you put away tax for $50,000, then you will get a refund. That's bottom line. That's how it works. It's a little more complicated than that. There's a whole bunch of things that you have to keep in mind. And I generally use an accountant because it gets way too confusing, especially with me and my husband and his business income and his work income, and it just gets way too convoluted. But taxes is one of the biggest pains in the butt when it comes to being self-employed, and if you're earning enough to be able to hire an accountant to help you out, I highly recommend it. I mean, unless you happen to be a tax code wizard and you love doing your own taxes, which there's very few people in the world who actually really love doing it. Some of the benefits of being self-employed, especially if you're working in an internet industry like I am, is one, you get to work from home, pretty much. Some clients like you to be on site, but if you have multiple clients, that kind of thing, like I do, they really can't require you to be on site, because what if you're only doing 10 hours of work for them, and then you've got, several hours for other clients, and I've got clients all over the country, so it's just not feasible for me to be on site with my clients. It's much better for me to work from home, which is great. And if you don't like working from home, let's say you don't like the isolation, you like to have human interaction, there are things out there called co-working spaces, where basically a bunch of other, we call ourselves solopreneurs, where basically we're entrepreneurs that are sole proprietors of our business. And you can find other solopreneurs, or also called micropreneurs, if you have, like me, I'm starting to have some subcontractors work for me. And you can go to a co-working space and work from there, and they will give you a space to sit, a desk space, internet, electricity, usually coffee and that kind of thing, and camaraderie with other people. They don't necessarily work for your company or have anything to do with you or your business, but they're all independent, self-employed people just like you are, and you can go out to lunch together, you can share client horror stories together, and that kind of thing. So for people who really like having the social interaction of working at a company but wanting to be self-employed, I would really recommend looking into seeing if there is a local co-working space in your area. If there isn't, you could always start one as well. if you got together with 4 or 5 other self-employed folks in your local area, let's say you can try to find them through like meetup.com, etc. Maybe they're friends of yours that you know, and try and get together. And if you really want to do kind of a more co-working space rather than working out of your house, pool your resources together and rent a little office space. You know, you don't have to have like an individual office for every person. You can have just like one big room and everyone has a desk together, and that way you can kind of collaborate and maybe share ideas and that kind of thing. And maybe some of the other entrepreneurs and solopreneurs in your area have a compatible business to yours. Let's say you're a programmer and developer and they're a graphic designer, and you have a client who kind of needs both. Then you can kind of both together offer your services to that person and kind of work together on a project. So there's all sorts of interesting things that you can do with that. I personally don't currently work with a co-working space. There are several in where I live right now, but I tend to work best by myself. I tend to be a very, very much independent, and I really like quiet. I don't like a lot of chatter, and that's the one thing that bothered me the most when I used to work at the tech company I used to work for, because there'd always be everyone was on the phone and talking and yakking, and it was so distracting. I feel like I'm a lot more efficient at home by myself, and I don't think I would be if I was at a co-working space. So, working from home was one thing, but then you can name your own price very often. I would recommend researching your industry and looking at like salary.com, looking at professional organizations. Like for me, for web analytics, I look at the Digital Analytics Association salary survey they do every year. And so based on the information from those sources is where I kind of get the idea of where I can set my price at based on my level of experience and background. So setting your own price within reason based on industry averages and things. And then also making your own hours. I mean, unless you actually have a brick and mortar store that you're running, if you're working from home or you're able to work from any remote location that you want to, you can also generally set your own hours, especially if you have multiple clients. They're not going to expect you to be sitting at your desk at 8 a.m., you know, from 8 to 5 every day. It's just, it isn't feasible. It's not realistic. You're not their employee. They're not your boss. They are your client. You are their contractor. And you get your work done when you want to get it done, with, of course, one thing in mind is the deadline. Always make sure that your clients give you a deadline, and always make sure that you meet your deadlines. If you don't meet your deadlines on a regular basis, if you're constantly turning work in late, your clients are going to go find someone else to work with. So that's the one thing to definitely keep in mind. So as long as you meet your deadlines on time every time, then you can do the work whenever you want to. If you want to work from midnight to 7 a.m., it's your choice. They don't care as long as you meet your deadlines. And especially if there's any conference calls you have to have with your clients, make sure you're always there for your conference calls. Missing conference calls can look bad. You know, you can miss them once in a while, especially if, let's say, you have an emergency. Let's say you have children and one of them falls and sprains their ankle, and you have to rush them to the doctor, and you forget that you had a conference call and you didn't have a chance to send an email out saying, "Oops, sorry, I can't make it," etc., and you just completely miss it. Things like that are forgivable, as long as they don't happen all the time. So keep that in mind, is meet your deadlines and make sure you attend any conference calls your clients invite you to, because those are often important, and they're not going to invite you to a conference call because they're going to pay you for your time. They're not going to invite you unless they absolutely need to have you there. So keep those things in mind as well. All right, well, hopefully you enjoyed some of these tips and ideas about self-employment. And look forward to next week. I'm actually going to do the Draw My Life tag. Thought I'd try that. And so look for that next week. Thanks for joining me.